We are drawn to stories about the missing. We pick over the few details preserved about those gone, select facts that have been recorded by the media or shared by the family. Most of those who are missing become lost to time. This is part of the allure. We can project onto them our own beliefs and insecurities. We can entertain the illusion that we are preparing in some way to avoid their fate, while similarly we can confront our own mortality. We are drawn to these stories because we are trying to understand. However, there are some cases that cannot be understood, not completely. In an attempt to escape face masks and social distancing, a record number of Americans have surged to visit national parks in 2020 and 2021. With the expectation of clean air, open space, and solitude, these visitors are unaware of another danger yet to be uncovered. There are roughly 640 million acres of federal land considered to be national parks and forests. These lands are overseen by the National Park Service on behalf of its parent agency, the Department of the Interior. It's a lot of territory to cover and manage, and it's a lot of area to get lost in. One expert has conservatively estimated 1,600 missing persons cases within the United States National Parks and Forest systems. Others have estimated it could be between 2 to 10 times as many. David Paulides is the leading civilian expert who began researching, tracking, and exposing these cases. Paulides is a former lawman and investigative journalist who received a tip from a Yosemite National Park ranger. The ranger expressed concern about how missing persons cases were being handled. The ranger complained that the National Park Service would mobilize resources, coordinate manpower, and spare no expense while the cases were the focus of media attention. However, as publicity and search and rescue efforts faded, the cases were forgotten. Paulides filed Freedom of Information Act requests petitioning for a list of disappearances. He received a response from an attorney who initially balked at his request until stating that no central database existed. He proposed that one could be created for the Yosemite National Park, but Paulides would need to cover the costs, estimated at $34,000. Additionally, they offered to complete a master database for all 383 national parks for a fee of $1.4 million. For this reason, there is no way of knowing how many have gone missing because, troublingly, there is no centralized registry or database to catalog and track these disappearances. This discovery is what led Paulides to form the Missing 411 and Can-Am Missing projects. The first book, Missing 411 Western United States, sparked national interest, and Paulides has since written more than half a dozen additional books, developed TV series and documentaries, and spoken publicly about national park disappearances. These books are titled after the number that can be dialed by Americans to reach the local information directory. Therefore, the title Missing 411 is supposed to be interpreted as, quote, missing information, unquote. In these books, Paulides has collected and compiled cases according to geographic clusters. These outlier cases could not be explained by animal predation, mental illness, criminality, voluntary disappearance, or other causes, and yet they shared uncanny and unexplained commonalities. These profile points have changed over the years. For example, some that were described by Paulides in an interview with Art Bell in 2015 were not included in his most recent documentary, Missing 411: The Hunted. Therefore, the following list may seem longer than usual for those familiar with the topic. It's said that the unexplained and strange disappearances in our national parks share many of the following characteristics. This is the composite Missing 411 profile. Victims who go missing are usually on either extremes of the intellectual spectrum, ranging from the highly intelligent to those who are struggling with mental disabilities. Victims who go missing are usually on either extremes of the physical spectrum, ranging from the very fit and active to those who are disabled or sedentary. The time of disappearances is often mid to late afternoon. Commonly, there is geographical clustering, with multiple disappearances occurring in the same area. Severe and inclement weather coincide with the disappearance or at the beginning of the search. Victims often go missing near large bodies of water, boulder fields, or berry bushes. If the victim is recovered, they have no memory or they have surreal narratives to explain their disappearance. The cause of death is often undetermined. Bodies are recovered in areas that have already been thoroughly covered by search and rescue. Search and rescue teams will often be unable to find any tracks, or if tracks are found, they will somehow vanish mid-path. Canine units will be unable to pick up a scent, or if they can pick up the scent, they will not pursue it. One or both shoes are often missing from the body of the victim. Despite often traveling great distances, the bare feet of the victim will be surprisingly unscathed. Lastly, victims are often found in areas that are difficult, if not impossible, to reach, especially in the time elapsed. While this video is not meant to debunk the missing 411 profile, it is worth noting that some of these points could be explained by a sampling bias. For example, those who go missing in the late afternoon would be reported at a time when visibility is low and search-rescue operations may be delayed until sunrise. Those who go missing before inclement weather would have a higher likelihood of not being found because visible tracks would be diminished, visibility would be low, and search and rescue operations would be impaired. Lastly, individuals who remain missing would have a higher likelihood of canine units being unable to find their scent. A found scent would lead to a higher likelihood of a found missing person. The following are 3 select cases used to illustrate some of the strange phenomenon that Missing 411 is trying to explain. On the morning of March 14, 2014, Dr. James McGrogan hiked into the wilderness outside of Vail, Colorado with a group of physicians. He had recently accepted a job as an emergency room physician in Indiana, and he was ready for a wintry trip into the mountains with friends. The group embarked on Spraddle Creek Trail toward Iceman Hut. They brought split boards, a snowboard that splits into 2 halves to allow for cross-country skiing when traveling uphill or touring. The trail was a steep climb through 9 miles of difficult terrain. The area was blanketed in snow and the path was well compacted and easy to identify. It may have been a difficult trek, but McGrogan and his friends were experienced and well prepared. McGrogan himself was in great physical condition, previously completing a marathon run. He was equipped with a working cell phone, extra battery, GPS tracker, food, and water supplies in his pack. The group stopped to take a break after a few hours, but McGrogan pushed onward. They planned to meet further up the trail, however, this is the last time McGrogan was seen alive. The group continued on the trail after only a few minutes, but they didn't encounter McGrogan at the designated meeting spot, and upon reaching the Iceman Hut, there was still no sign of McGrogan. Eagle Valley Sheriff's Department searched on foot and snowmobile. 3 helicopters assisted in the search, and they covered over 18 square miles for the next 5 days, until bad weather drove them to end the search. 20 days later, hikers found McGrogan at the bottom of an ice fall in Booth Falls, 4.5 air miles east from Iceman Hut. The area had already been searched multiple times by search and rescue. Authorities reported that parts of Vail could be seen from where McGrogan's body was recovered. He was found with head trauma and a broken femur, partially undressed. He was not wearing his coat, gloves, or boots. McGrogan would have had to climb and descend nearly 5,200 feet in steep elevation, requiring a path that likely traversed 10 to 16 miles, switchbacking to safely navigate the slopes. He would have had to cross Middle Creek and fight his way through snowdrifts up to 30 feet tall. McGrogan meets many of the criteria outlined in the missing 411 profile. He was intelligent and physically fit. He disappeared in mid-afternoon, and his search was halted by severe weather. He was found at the bottom of an icefall in an area that had already been thoroughly searched, and he seemed to have vanished off a clear trail with no visible tracks. He had removed his boots before the incident, and he was in a dangerous and difficult place to reach. Why didn't McGrogan activate his GPS transponder? Paulides confirmed the area where McGrogan was found had cellular reception, so why didn't McGrogan dial for an emergency rescue? Bart Schleyer was a practiced outdoorsman and accomplished wildlife biologist with experience in the Grizzly Bear Recovery Project in Yellowstone and the tiger conservations in Siberia. Paradoxically, Schleyer was also an avid hunter, and he was prone to spending weeks or even months in the wilderness, bow hunting wildlife. Schleyer was last seen alive by the pilot who flew his chartered float plane to Reed Lakes in the Canadian Yukon Territory on September 14, 2004. The plane would return 2 weeks later to pick up the hunter, but he was nowhere to be found. Schleyer was well prepared for his trip. He brought 3 Action Packer crates of gear. One crate was filled with canned food that would last a couple of weeks. The second crate was filled with his clothing for the trip, and the third contained his camping gear, including a good tent, sleeping bag, inflatable boat, and more. After he was reported missing on September 30th, Mounties from the RCMP in Whitehorse, over 175 miles away, investigated his campsite. They found the remains of a meal at his camp, but the food crate was secured. They discovered his boat a half a mile from the camp, in the brush shore of the lake. It had been secured at both ends in the thick brush. With the weather deteriorating, the Mounties speculated that Schleyer had hiked to the Klondike Highway. However, his friends were adamant that this was not a possibility, as he had not contacted any of them. Dissatisfied with the RCMP's response, a friend of Schleyer's in Whitehorse, named Dib Williams, returned to the campsite with a friend. They found Schleyer's camp. His tent had been knocked down, and they discovered his backpack, bear spray, VHF radio, and knife on site. Williams and his friend returned the next day to continue their search around the boat. Less than 200 feet in the woods, they discovered Schleyer's bow with handmade arrows and a buckskin quiver. They found a bag full of gear. Many speculated this was a blind, and Schleyer had been sitting on his pack, prepared to call and hunt moose. In broadening their search, the two found a camouflage mask with some hair and blood inside. On October 3rd, Mounties returned to the scene with conservation officers and civilians to begin a grid search. Further searching turned up a baseball cap, camouflage pants, and camera. These were not damaged, scratched, torn, or bloody. Bones were discovered 200 feet away. The teeth were used to identify the bones as those of Schleyer. Speculation centered on a bear or wolf attack. However, there was no sign of a death struggle nearby. The surrounding area was covered in undisturbed moss. The clothing would have been damaged and soaked with blood. Additionally, scat from bears and wolves nearby were collected and tested. While they did contain bone, there was no sign of fabric. In other instances of bear attacks on humans, clothing is often found mixed with remains in the bear's scat. In other cases, bears will cache their prey, meaning they will bury it for storage and return at a later date. But there was no such cache nearby. Lastly, bears do not seek to incapacitate or slay their prey. They will simply begin to eat. whether their prey is alive or not. This would have led to a gruesome and messy scene, but searchers could find nothing of the sort. His campsite and bag were left undisturbed, but attacking animals would likely return to investigate, especially for the canned goods. Bears can and will eat through tin cans. Schleyer meets many of the criteria outlined in the missing 411 profile. He was a bright and accomplished outdoorsman who was physically capable of withstanding the toughest climbs. The inclement weather of the Canadian tundra impacted search efforts by both the RCMP and Schleyer's friends. He disappeared near the Reed Lakes in an area that had previously been searched by the RCMP. The cause of death could not be determined. Some speculated that he suffered a bear attack, but there were no clear signs of a death struggle, no fabric in nearby grizzly scat, and no tooth marks in the recovered portion of Schleyer's skull. Schleyer was an avid outdoorsman and experienced hunter with a past of recovering grizzly bears. With that in mind, how could he have suffered a surprise bear attack? How had his clothing been removed without claw or tooth marks? And with no sign of a struggle or remains nearby, what happened to him in those woods? On June 4th, 2017, Mike Peterson headed out for a lone hike in West Yellowstone. He wore an orange hunting vest and waders, and he was well equipped, packing bear spray, food, and a firearm. He began down a familiar trail, one he had hiked with his children in the past. In fact, he was so familiar with the trail that he knew where he would have cell service. Throughout the hike, he texted his girlfriend, Bonnie Sanger, who was at a different area of the park. He arranged for her to pick him up at 6 p.m., and they would start a fire, cook dinner, and relax. Sanger arrived at the arranged location at 6 p.m., but there was no sign of Peterson. She waited for him, and at 7:20 p.m. she heard 4 gunshots in the woods. She called the local sheriff's office, and a search and rescue operation began at 10 p.m. Over 40 individuals participated in the search and rescue, including canine units and helicopters. They combed the park in search of Peterson, but severe weather impaired the search, grounding the helicopters for a time. It wasn't until 3 days later that they found Peterson's body in Beaver Creek. Searchers found Peterson's orange vest and bear spray half a mile away from the river. Upon further searching, they discovered his pack and firearm in a second location. Some speculated that Peterson had been surprised and driven into the water by a bear, but the search and rescue team never uncovered bear tracks around Peterson's body or belongings. Mike Peterson matches many of the missing 411 profile points. He was a physically fit outdoorsman with backcountry experience, and he was familiar with the area. He disappeared in the late afternoon, and his disappearance coincided with Jeff Murphy, another hiker who disappeared from Yellowstone in that same week. The search for Mike Peterson was impaired by severe weather, and he vanished into Beaver Creek. The sheriff's office speculated that Peterson had crossed the creek early in the morning, but snowmelt upstream had dramatically increased the height and speed of the water when he returned. They guessed he had been swept off his feet and drowned. But that doesn't explain why Peterson would have left his belongings behind if he planned to return to Spanger. As an experienced outdoorsman, he had enough supplies and means of communication to simply signal for help and wait. While Peterson was recovered, many questions still remain and will likely never be answered. Missing 411 attempts to draw connections between seemingly unconnected cases. It does not provide an explanation or cause behind these connections. However, skeptics and believers alike are quick to jump to conjecture about the true cause behind these cases. Skeptics maintain that these profile points are coincidences due to data selection, and they explain the cases with a number of hypotheses. Victims who are in peak intellectual and physical condition may overestimate their abilities. behaving with less caution than necessary for their circumstances. In frigid temperatures, individuals may suffer from hypothermia and begin to paradoxically undress, a common phenomenon. Their confusion during this time could result in distant travel and bizarre behavior, including the removal of clothing like shoes. Violent criminals may visit or retreat to national parks in the search of easy victims. They would prefer these locations because of their lack of surveillance and witnesses. Victims may have been suffering from depression or mental health issues and may have entered the woods in a final act of surrender. These are just a few of the hypotheses laid out by skeptics of the missing 411 profile. Many believers skew toward paranormal explanations as the cause for connection between these cases. A number of extra or ultra-terrestrials have been proposed as the cause of these disappearances and deaths. Alien abductors and Bigfoot would prefer the seclusion of the national parks and be startled or threatened by the intrusion of hikers. Some have proposed that cloaked beings stalk the woods, nicknamed Glimmermen. However, their background and purposes are unclear. Cave creatures, similar to the goblins of Hopkinsville, have been proposed because Paulides' map of the missing closely resembles a map of the U.S. cave systems in our national parks. Rifts in time and space have been suggested as the cause because victims will sometimes vanish instantly, almost in front of witnesses, or they will disappear without a trace. Missing 411 doesn't resolve the mysteries behind these cases. It's a lens for us to view the story, to try to understand that which cannot be understood. We are drawn to these mysteries because they cannot be resolved. Looking for answers, we are only left with questions. That and the memory of those who have gone.